Bills Mafia, what is up? And welcome into another edition of the Humble and Hungry podcast. Yes, we are stringing these episodes together like we never have before. And today I have another special guest. He is Ryan Thomas, host of the Thomas Take Sports podcast on the Buffalo fan base, something that I
Yep.
am very familiar with. Ryan, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Charlie. It's a pleasure being on your show. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you taking the time. And so let's get into it. We've got training camp started a couple days ago. Uh, the defense, as expected, the defense seems to always be ahead of the offense, but as expected, the Bills' defense is putting on quite a show as far as training camp goes. Certainly, glowing reports, pretty much coming from I think all aspects of the defense. So let's start with this, and then you can kind of maybe you can just kind of take where you want to go with it. Obviously, there's questions, not questions. People really want to know about Von Miller, the defensive line rotation. Greg Rousseau has looked good. Sean McDermott talked glowingly about Tremaine Edmonds again, which really isn't a surprise to me. Obviously, he's a bit polarizing in the fan base, and it seems like the defensive backs are really being real aggressive so far. Now, will that carry over to the regular season? We don't know. Obviously, there's some Kaiir Elam, Stephon Diggs, good battles going on. So, what are your first thoughts about the defense um, with the first reports coming out of training camp?
It's nothing that I didn't expect, to be quite honest with you. As far as just the expectations that are on this team, everybody in the national media really talks about Josh Allen, as they should, but they're talking about the offense a lot, whereas there's guys on this defense that led a number one defensive unit throughout the regular season, and there are guys on this defense that have been on this defense year in, year out, like Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, that are playing with a big chip on their shoulder heading into this training camp, and I think a lot of it stems from, dare I say, the 13 seconds game, where that defense was picked apart in a very short amount of time by Patrick Mahomes. And over the course of the offseason, everybody was talking about that game. One game of the year at the ESPYs for a reason. And the Bills' defense is something that easily comes up in conversation as what the heck happened. And now this defense is playing with a huge chip on their shoulder against arguably the best offense in the NFL on the other side, on one team. So it's an iron sharpens iron mentality. We're at that point where you have a youth movement on defense with Kaiir Elam. You have Terrell Bernard, who is getting high praise from Leslie Frazier as far as how he has gelled into the system and how he has been a physical linebacker for them and has really soaked it all in like a sponge. And I expect this defense to be a unit that raises the bar for itself. The expectations should be high, and they should be even higher than what they expect, because this team is capable of so much more. These last two seasons, ending in the divisional round against Kansas City, ending in the AFC Championship against the Kansas City Chiefs, I would say both seasons, I could make an argument that the Buffalo Bills actually underachieved rather than overachieved in the last 2 years. And the expectations are high, but I don't think the expectations could be higher. They could be even higher within the locker room. The expectations aren't any higher, in the national media than what they are in the locker room, is what I'm trying to say here. And Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde are leading the way. Obviously, we'll get into Tre White as the show wears on, but you have me smiling when you mentioned Kaiir Elam and Stephon Diggs. Who doesn't love that? To hear that Kaiir Elam does have this chip on his shoulder and he's getting a little testy with Stephon Diggs. That's what you want out of a corner that you just used a first-round draft choice on. That's what you want out of a rookie corner that's lining up against one of, if not the best wide receiver in the NFL, who has been nothing but productive since coming to Buffalo, who has been nothing but a leader since coming to Buffalo as well. That's music to my ears. And seeing reports of that, seeing reports of how Ed Oliver is feeding off of Von Miller as a three-technique defensive tackle, which Von has credited Aaron Donald for, and credited the guys in Denver for being that help alongside him.
Right.
The expectations are so high, Charlie, and rightfully so. I mean, I'm honestly, excited for the chip on their shoulder that they have on the defensive side of the ball specifically, and I think it's going to produce immediate impact results.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting point about the Elam Diggs thing. Like Diggs, I'm assuming, knowing what we know from him about him from an outsider's view, he wants Elam to be that way. Like he's gonna respect him more for being that way. Lessons can be learned obviously in from your position coach. We've heard that Hyde and Poyer, he's staying late with Hyde and Poyer to do more work. But lessons can also be learned by going against a guy like Stephon Diggs and even talking to Stephon Diggs and him giving Elam input on, okay, well, instead of doing this, do this. It'll give me more trouble. If I do this, look for this. And also, I think it's just a great point about how the Bills have kind of underachieved. And I know that sounds crazy to a lot of people, but when I started kind of going through the analytics and sort of trying to flesh out some of my stuff, I really came away with, and like, the offense wasn't great last year. And I know that sounds crazy maybe for people listening to hear, but it really wasn't. Like, if you go kind of by DVOA, like they were obviously pretty good, but their player grades were pretty average for the most part, whatever you want to put into that. And defensively, I've always felt like they were sort of doing it with smoke and mirrors. Like, the scheme does a lot of work for them, and credit to them that they play the scheme so well, and they've done a good job of getting pressure. But when it comes to those key crunch time moments, they haven't had a closer, and they've done all this without a guy who, when you need a play, can make a play on the defensive line anyway. And now they have Von Miller and his impact, along with Daquan Jones at the one tag. I think it's just really going to impact Ed Oliver. It's going to impact Greg Rousseau. It's going to impact Tremaine Edmonds, and therefore it's going to impact the secondary. And offensively, like I said, like they really kind of struggled for. So my thing is, imagine if they don't struggle. Imagine what this would look like with a defense who I think is really elevated their talent, coupled with an offense who's really hitting on all cylinders. This is going to be a really scary team, and I maintain that the schedule is difficult, although it's not as difficult as I thought it would be looking at it last year. But this could be a really, dangerous team. I mean, this team could really, just go crazy.
And I like what you mentioned about the term closer. You do look at the analytics as I do, and I know as you do, and you do see these last two seasons, the offense last season wasn't as one-dimensional as it was the year before. But I say it wasn't as one-dimensional because it still was. I mean, up until week 10, and I remember specifically up until week 10, because every single week on my post-game show, it felt like I was just a record on repeat, saying that, to make a long story short, where is the run game? I know it's a passing league. I know that the best teams in the NFL have quarterbacks that can throw the ball with relative ease. Josh Allen is one of those guys. But when push comes to shove, when you're playing those upper echelon teams that know you have a great pass game, that know what you do and how you pass the football effectively, you have to have some sort of a fallback plan, which would be the run game. And I think they added two quote-unquote closers on the offensive side as well as the defensive side. You could say Von Miller and Kaiir Elam are the two on the defensive side, and you could say that O.J. Howard and James Cook are the two on the offensive side. Seldomly do you see a team that has been that effective on offense and has shown effectiveness on defense add what could quite possibly be major weapons over the course of just one offseason. An offseason that I make jokes about it all the time. Brandon Beane said to the fans he didn't expect to really add a lot, to the team this year. Well, he must have had his fingers crossed under the table, or he must have known what his plan was, or maybe he didn't expect, the plan to flow the way that it did. But nonetheless, they added a lot of talent to this team, and this is already a talented team, now with more talent on it, with home run threats, with closers, as you said. And the expectations are so high, and rightfully so, due to the results we've seen these last two seasons. And Von Miller is a guy that I think symbolizes just how far they have come. Just signing a player like that, I think he's going to produce. Of course, he's produced everywhere he's played, but just signing a player like that cements in stone that these are not the same old Bills. This is a completely different era that we're living in, and this is a team that is going to be a contender for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Brandon Bean has done a great job, and yeah, he always is kind of like, well, we'll see.
Right.
It's just funny, and quickly back to the offense before we get to like Tre White and stuff like that. I was listening to Locked On Bills, and this might have been 2 or 3 weeks ago. And Joe, brought up, he said, "Hey, man, the tight end production's like 29th in the NFL, and if you take away Josh Allen's rushing, the rushing is like 30th in the NFL, and the running back passes are like 30. So they've done all this that they've done the last 2 years, basically just throwing the wide receivers and a little bit to like Dawson Knox. So just
Right.
expanding sort of, sometimes you don't always have to expand upward, you can expand outward. Although I
Yep.
don't recommend humans do that, but certainly the playbook, and adding the players like that is really exciting, and it's really you know gives teams more things to think about. And then defensively, it sounds like, from what Leslie, all we've heard is, oh, he's on schedule, he's no one knows what that means, obviously, because the Bills aren't going to tell us. But Leslie Frazier, I think it was yesterday, kind of said that they're hoping that he's back, Tre White's back for week 1. And so to me, that's kind of what on schedule means. Like, if the defensive coordinator says they hope he's back for week 1, that sounds like they think it's a schedule. Now, I thought he might end up on the pup list to start the year, but and the reports are good coming out from Dane Jackson. Like, Dane Jackson's playing well. You've got Nick McLeod kind of switched to safety. He's playing well. So, the depth that he's provided in case Tre White isn't here. But man, I mean, get Tre White back week 1. I think the hardest 6-7 games are the first 6 or 7 games, and after that, the schedule's pretty easy.
Yeah, I would agree, and I echo the same sentiments as you. When Tre White went down, that's not just any other injury that he experienced, and he's not just any other player. Tre White, you want to talk about immediate impact, going above and beyond each and every season that he's been a part of the Buffalo Bills. They threw the book at that kid coming in as a kid, putting him against, at the time, the best receivers in the league, week in, week out. And not only did he pass the test, he quickly became one of the best corners, if not the best corner in the NFL. He's extremely underrated, in my opinion, just as much as, if not more than, Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. Tre White, I really believe that, that injury was one that did change the season. I don't want to use that as an excuse as far as what happened, especially in Kansas City. But losing a guy like that on the field as well as off the field, in the sense that he can't go back out there as he's standing on the sideline permanently, definitely changed the makeup, the leadership dynamic of the team. And getting him back is priority number one, I think, for that defense and arguably for that team to hit the ground running. As you said, those first 6 to 7 weeks, if they can get him back and get him playing effectively as he was prior to the injury, then you're just adding another dimension of danger for the opposition that, hey, not only is this team more talented than they were last year on paper, and not only are these guys playing within the right scheme and they're feeding off of each other and the vibes are so good, but you also have one of the best corners back in action, healthy, ready, willing, and able to be a shark out there on the field. And I'm really excited for that news. I saw him walking, onto the field, kind of around the field with some of the trainers and riding the stationary bike and stuff like that. And I know that reports in the offseason were that he was working tirelessly with physical therapists and stuff of that nature, rehabbing that knee. And it was a gruesome injury. It was a rough injury to watch. You couldn't really see it, I remember, during the broadcast, but they re-showed it, and that clip has circulated quite a few times over social media. Those non-contact
Yeah.
ACL injuries are far worse than a contact ACL injury, and it's due in large part to the turf that they're playing on, pulling your leg one way and the leg and the knee specifically going the opposite direction, and that's exactly what happened. But nowadays, with the medical science and injury advancements that we have towards rehabilitation, an ACL injury is nowhere near as bad as it was 10 years ago. So it's nice to see that he has received the proper care towards that injury, and I can't wait to see his return.
Yeah, I think, what his presence allows them to do in terms of sort of rotating safeties, who gets help where they're trying to, direct the offense to force them to throw the ball to certain areas with him on the field. That certainly opens that up and really allows them to kind of do obviously what they really want to do.
Right.
Uh, Quickly before we get out of here, I know you got someplace to be. When you whether it's Facebook or Twitter, and you're seeing reports from the beat writers or from fans at practice, who are you looking for? Like, is there a player or two or a position battle where you're really in tune with, like, man, what's going on there? I know a lot of us are like in with the punter and the kick return battle, which sounds a bit silly, but that's what a lot of people are focused on. Is there something for you where you're really looking for news from a certain position group or a certain player?
Oh yeah, I mean, I would say just across the board. I honestly, I can't get enough of this stuff. I eat, sleep, and breathe Buffalo Bills information. I try to follow the team with an obsessive level. 365 days a year. Sometimes to a fault. My girlfriend's saying, "Hey, you're looking at your phone at Bills stuff," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's only May, but it's never too early." So that's the kind of guy I am. But jokes aside, honestly, I am so curious to see how some of these rookies shake out. James Cook being one of them, Kerry Elam being another, and Khalil Shakir, who is receiving rave reviews as far as what he has looked like early on here in training camp. And obviously, the Bills, they not only added the big name talent in Von Miller, but they also added, Jamison Crowder, Tavon Austin, names that we know, throughout the league as productive players in their specific role. So seeing if those guys can make the team, seeing how, Daquan Jones, who you mentioned, how he's fitting in, mainly seeing how the new players on the roster are fitting into the team. Because this is as close a team as the Bills have had since the days, of four straight Super Bowls, the AFC powerhouse, quote unquote, missing ring dynasty that they were. So it is what it is as far as that goes. We're moving on to the future now. We're living in the present and the future. And, the expectations, as I said, have never been higher, and rightfully so. It's a little bit odd for me, Charlie, to go through, getting the USA Today, getting the papers and all that stuff that I get every year, and seeing that the Bills are expected by pretty much everybody to not only be the best team in the NFL wins-loss wise for the regular season, but to be the easily favored Super Bowl champions. So the odds makers are expecting the Buffalo Bills to run away with this thing, that nobody will even come close to them. And that's uncharted territory for me. I don't remember. I remember pretty far back, and I remember the agony that was going through those lean quarterback years. And now they have their guy, and that guy is Josh Allen, no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's kind of weird for me, because I was a teenager, in the 90s, the early 90s. I was in high school, and obviously I didn't have the cognitive awareness really to think about football the way I do now, or the way we do now, being the age I was. But you know it was obvious they were extremely good, and I'm assuming there were times, where they were favored, going to the Super Bowl. And there was certainly, after they went to the first one, there was talk of them probably going back again. I mean, in terms of whatever betting was out there. So to go through that kind of, and then see them sort of try to keep it going, but not really, and then get through this drought, and then just kind of look like a normal sports franchise. I mean, most sports franchises are kind of average. and then suddenly to find ourselves kind of back here, like it was a little unexpected for me because obviously I knew that there was potential with Josh Allen, but coming out he was pretty bad. I think that's fair. And you didn't really know, like you had some inklings, and obviously the most positive fans were convinced very early. It took me a little longer to come around, but suddenly to go from like, man, they're pretty good to like they're like the favorite. That's really kind of weird for me. Like I don't think many fans really get to experience that kind of like twice in their life, right?
Right.
Like if you were around for the AFL days, like, and sure you caught maybe you caught the 90s depending on your age, but it's just kind of weird in a good way. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's just weird, I guess, too, with all the social media,
It
like there was
is.
never this much, you hype, right? Because there was all in the newspaper back then. There wasn't
Right.
all this other stuff. So,
What makes it so weird is, and I think I'm definitely in agreement with you. What makes it so weird is how quick this has happened.
right.
This has happened over a 4 or 5 year span. That's not a long time. That's really not. Going back to 2017 when they broke the drought, and got that. Off their backs. We had Kyle Williams on the team. You had Eric Wood on the team still. Those were guys that were tried and true Buffalo Bills players. And now that they're in the successful period that they're in, like, I don't know about you, but as a fan, my heart breaks for like the Eric Molds of the world, the Fred Jacksons of the world
Yeah.
that didn't get the chance to experience being a perennial contender, year in and year out because they didn't have a Josh Allen. And I want to hammer that home because Josh Allen is the catalyst for why and how the Bills are where they are. Despite people saying, hey, it's a quarterback driven league, I want to say, yeah, he is the quarterback of the team and it is a quarterback driven league, but the moxie, the mojo, the swagger, all those terms that the kids use nowadays, Josh Allen's got it and that much more. So we do have to kind of temper expectations though, because it's so awkward for me to say that there's such massive favorites when this was the team last year that did lose to Jacksonville. And they did lose on the 1 yard line to Tennessee. I mean, football is football. You
Right.
know that as well as I do. Expectations are expectations until September starts. So all this stuff is great. Don't get me wrong, I'm loving it. But at the same time, any given Sunday, Monday, Thursday, you know,
Yeah.
you never know what can happen. You never know.
Right. And that's weird things happen, and I think I hope that the one thing that Sean McDermott changes this year is that he doesn't coach scared. Certainly in the playoffs against the Chiefs, if the Bills happen to meet them again, I don't think he coached scared in the regular season against the
Right.
Chiefs, but all of a sudden in the playoffs, it kind of seemed like he was coaching scared. Maybe not as scared as he was the year before, with the whole Chris Jones destroying Feliciano and destroying Josh Allen game. But he's always kind of been like, gee, I hope we can keep up. And I think, this year he has to kind of just be like, well, they need to keep up with us.
Yeah.
And stop. And he's made some weird decisions. Yeah. And I mean, Eric Molds is a great player. And that's the one thing. And I think that's the thing, too, that maybe in a way is so painful about the drought, in which I kind of just almost I diverted a lot of my attention elsewhere by like 2010, 2011, because it became clear to me they didn't have a plan.
Right.
And so like they were always like kind of good. Like the defense was always pretty good, but they never really had like a plan to
They
get the
always
quarterback,
they always
you
had a
know?
great running back too.
Right.
That
They had
was-
great running back. They had
yeah.
like a great defense, but they were just like, nah, we'll just try to get by with like these, and so I just was kind of like, okay, this is just getting ridiculous. They'd be better off just kind of tearing it down. And they never really wanted to do that. And so, yeah, I think a lot of those guys, had cheapened. I don't know if cheapens, but look at Aaron Schobel. I mean, he was
Right.
a great player, and even Marcellus Wiley. I know he got hurt and he left for, I believe, Jacksonville, but he was a really good pass rusher for the Bills for a while, and even like a Josh Reed or a Lee Evans. I mean, imagine, you know, those guys with, like you said, like a Josh Allen or
Right.
it's it's too bad that they sort of just, it just happened that they kind of ended up in the era that they ended up in, because I think
Yeah.
Eric Moles is like
Eric
six
Moulds
three,
was a
like
monster.
220, and he like ran like 4.44. I was like,
Monster.
that guy would be
Monster.
crazy in today's game.
I love Andre Reed, and I've had the pleasure of meeting him a couple times. And I mean, you look at receiver for receiver, Andre Reed, Bill's GOAT, but just like what you would want in a receiver, Eric Moulds is like
Yeah.
physically just off the charts. Off the charts.
Oh yeah.
Ridiculous. Way before his time, I would say,
Oh
too.
yeah, definitely. Like he was like Andre Johnson before like Andre Johnson or something like
Exactly.
that. Like
Yeah. Yep.
um. Well, Ryan, I appreciate you coming on, and I know you gotta take off. Let all the people know where they can find you and all your work and stuff like that.
Yeah, Charlie, I really appreciate you having me on. I'm actually in the house hunting market right now, so I'm going to an
Oh,
open
good luck.
house tonight. So yeah, it's been interesting. We'll see what happens with it, but putting out the feelers for that. But definitely appreciate you having me on. It's always a pleasure getting a chance to chat with you. It's been too long. But for the viewers and listeners of the show, you can follow me on Twitter at Ryan Thomas Take. My podcast is the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. It's available on Apple Podcasts, Google, all the audio podcasting platforms, but especially YouTube and Facebook. I have so much content coming out that hasn't even been aired yet. Stuff in regards to fantasy football, position rankings, all that stuff. So each and every week, Wednesdays, you can catch me on with a guest or without a guest, depending on schedules and stuff. I like to have a guest on either Sundays or Wednesdays, but there's a guest on every single week, and I really appreciate the time that people give, to me coming on my show, as well as the invite back again. So Charlie, I'll throw you an invite to come on my podcast sometime before the season starts this August. Extending the invitation to you now. I know
Well,
you're pumped
yeah.
up for Bills football, as am I. So, yeah, I'd love to have you on.
Oh yeah, that would be great. Yeah, just let me know what day works for you, and we'll get that going. And I want to thank everybody who's either watching or listening. You can find me on Twitter at ttp_Charlie. This is the Humble and Hungry podcast, which is brought to you by 12 Squared, Trust the Process Analytics. Bills Mafia, find a way to embrace your growth mindset, and as always, trust the process.